We wash our hands, and we wash many things because of personal hygiene. The gospel, on the other hand, speaks about a time and a people who washed their hands and washed many things for another reason. They were rituals. They were rites of purification. They were outward signs that were meant to remind them of an interior attitude and reality that God was looking for on the part of people. They were never instituted by God with regard to the Mosaic Law. They were instituted later by people as reminders of the Mosaic Law. It's a little bit like you and I when we come to Mass on Ash Wednesday and we receive the ashes on our forehead. The ashes are an outward sign that are supposed to remind us and everybody else, first, of who we are as Christian people, and of that interior attitude and reality which is supposed to be present in our hearts. It's a little like on Palm Sunday when we come to get the palms that are blessed and we bring them home. They are supposed to be a reminder for us of Jesus, who was this Lord of Lords and King of Kings and rode in triumphantly into Jerusalem. And it wasn't but 5 days later where they would crucify him so that you and I might be able to experience salvation. They are reminders. But what Jesus is criticizing them for is that the reminders, the outward signs, have become more important than the law which they are supposed to be reminded of. And so they're critical of Jesus and his disciples because they don't wash their hands before they eat. And you heard what Jesus said. He quotes from Isaiah the prophet. Well did Isaiah prophesy about you. You pay lip service to God. You're doing all of the right things on the outside, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. And so he says to them that their worship is in vain. It is not authentic. It's not authentic worship. In other words, they're simply going through the motions, and God is not pleased with going through the motions. And so at the end of the gospel, Jesus gives us what I call an excellent examination of conscience. And when I looked at those words, I thought to myself, well, I know what those words mean. But then I thought a little better about it, and I said, well, do I really know what those words mean? Because sometimes we have opinions about things, or we have ideas, or we think we know something, and we might only know a part of it, not the whole of it. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to look up these words. I want to see what they mean. I was surprised. And I have to tell you, to be honest with you, I had to take a step back because it convicted me. So I thought I'd share with you some of the definitions of just some of the words that I looked up. And the first word that I looked up was murder. Now, we all know that when you murder somebody, it is an act which takes their life from them. However, the definition goes further because it says it also means to spoil or mar by bad representation. So in other words, when we mar or spoil a person's name or character, we are guilty of murder. Whenever we participate in gossip, whether we're on the gossiping end of it or whether we're on the listening end of it, we are participants in the destruction of the name and the character of that person. That's called character assassination. And they don't die one death, they die 1,000. Because they live it over and over and over again. Now, I would bet that probably everybody in the church this morning, at some time or other, has been on the receiving end of what it means to experience character assassination. We all know that hurts. But I think it's probably equally as true that at some point we've been on the other end of it as well, whether we passed on the information or whether we listened to it. It's a serious, serious sin. And so, we say, well, I gossiped a little bit. Well, how do you murder somebody just a little bit? How do you kill somebody just a little bit? There's no little bit about it. It's a serious, serious sin. Then I looked up the word malice. It says, the desire to inflict injury, harm, or suffering on another. An evil intent on the part of the person. In other words, all you have to have is an intent and a desire to inflict harm or suffering. It doesn't say that you have to inflict it. So I thought to myself, how many times have I had evil thoughts about people? I want them to feel like I feel. I'm guilty of malice. I'm guilty of a serious sin just because I entertained a thought not here, but in my heart. Then I looked up the word licentiousness. It says that it means sexually unrestrained, immoral behavior. Oh my gosh. Well, all you got to do is turn on your television set to know that that's true. Or take a walk to the mall and look into one of the windows and go a little window shopping, and it won't be long before you realize that you're being sexually assaulted. My goodness, they use sex to sell toothpaste today. And the worst part of it is that our children are becoming sexualized. Our children are being robbed of their innocence because of this highly charged, sexualized culture that we live in. We are swimming in this stuff. And you know what gets me? Is that to the degree that it's everywhere that you turn around, and then when someone falls into that sin, we want to cut them off at the ankles. And I say, what'd you expect? Think about it. We have no tolerance for that today, and yet you don't have to go too far, and there it is. There's something wrong with that. Blasphemy. Impious speech or actions concerning God or sacred things, irreverent behavior toward anything which is sacred. I thought, you take the Lord's name in vain, you're guilty of blasphemy, but it goes further. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about our attitude of heart as to how we come to communion and what do we do after we go to communion. And I talked about how sometimes people walk out of the church. Well, you thought that I was talking to the wall because the following week, right back out the door they went. That's arrogant. That is the height of arrogance. That's an attitude that says, no one's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want. That's the sin of blasphemy. That's a serious sin. Folly. lack or sense of understanding costly and foolish actions, unwise investments or expenditures. So, look around. All you got to do, we're in debt up to here, personally and nationally. And what's going on with that? I beg the question, is it because the further away we get from God and, trying to live the commandments, do we cling to human wisdom instead of the wisdom of God? It's interesting that Jesus called the Pharisees and the scribes hypocrites. I looked that word up. Do you know what it means? Actors. He called them actors. He said that they were going through the emotions. They were doing all of the right things on the outside. They were making the sign of the cross when they came in. They were dipping their fingers into the holy water when they came into the church. They were genuflecting and they were bowing. But when it came to the meat and the weightier things of the law, as to the things of God and to the things of how we take care of one another, how we respect or disrespect one another, he said that they were actors. And he said that their worship was false. It was in vain. He said they pay lip service to God. I told you when I looked these up, I was convicted. I had to take a step back. Because I thought, to myself, well, I'm a priest. I pray every day. I'm doing pretty good. I'm trying to live the gospel. I got to go to confession. Because I've taken some things for granted. And unknowingly, I've become indoctrinated, I've become acclimated, I've become conditioned to the way of the world. Recently I was having a conversation with my own mother. And I was talking to her about cohabitation. And she said to me, my mom's 84 years old. And she said, well, they're all doing it. I said, Ma! I said, if I had tried to do that, when I, 25, 30 years ago, what would you have said? You see, so what's happened to my mother that during that time, that she now is willing to accept that in her thinking, where I know she would have never accepted it from me or my sister. You see what's happening? So it's a reminder that we need to make good examinations of our conscience constantly, because it's so easy to become acclimated and to go with what's going on. St. Paul tells us in 2 Timothy, he says that all who want to live religiously in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. But wicked people and charlatans will go from bad to worse, deceivers and deceived. But you remain faithful to what you have learned and believed, because you know from whom you learned it, and that from infancy you have known the sacred scriptures, which are capable of giving you wisdom for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. All we got to do is stay close to the Lord and remember the commandments that He has given us, and that the outward signs, if it's true worship, the outward signs that we use to remind us will not only be a reminder for us, it will be a witness to the world.